Hey Tommy, we've got some breaking news that everybody is talking about, and I'm of course referring to the story that California is about to ban the sale of new internal combustion cars after 2035. In other words, only electric cars will be allowed to be sold in California starting in 2035.
Yeah, that's if this passes, and we've got a whole bunch of cool stuff we're going to talk about today. Talk about some of this regulation, this proposed regulation that could go into effect, and what that means for cars, trucks, pickup trucks, and SUVs. And we'll start talking about that right now.
Yeah, so first of all, don't panic, guys. And I say that because we've driven every electric car out there, and they're not as bad as some of the media may have you think. Why don't you just go through the story very quickly so people know what we're talking about.
So this is according to the Washington Post. They say the proposed regulation would set strict deadlines for meeting that goal, forcing automakers to step up production of cleaner vehicles considerably starting in 2026. The requirements would only speed forward from there until only zero-emission passenger cars, pickup trucks, and SUVs, as well as a limited number of plug-in hybrids are allowed to be sold in the states by 2035. Leanne Rudolph, chair of the Air Resources Board, CARB, California Air Resources Board, trumpeted the proposal for delivering, quote, a more than 50% reduction in pollution from cars and light trucks by 2040 and moving the state closer to a future where there are no emissions at all, vehicle emissions at all.
I think it's fair to say that I'm not a fan of mandates, and I'm certainly not a fan of subsidies, be they for electric cars or for farmers. I think that the free market should decide, but we live in a world where these things are happening. So I wanted to do this video, Tommy, because I think a lot of people are going to be frightened of the fact that the government is forcing electric cars down their throats. At least that's the way a lot of people will see this. So I wanted to talk about electric cars, and I want to talk about the testing that we've done, and just kind of hopefully hit the don't panic button, because I drove to work today in a Ford F-150 Lightning, the electric pickup truck, and that is by far the best F-150 that Ford builds. And I've driven every variant of that, including the 2.7, the 3.5, the diesel, the Coyote, and the Lightning is just a wonderful truck. And people who hate electric cars or who are afraid of them focus on a number of different aspects that are not as good as internal combustion. So I want to address those issues in this video.
All right, and then we'll also talk about some things that are scaring me about this and what that means for the future as well. But let's talk about some of the pros of electric cars. Now, I'm a big proponent for them if you have a place to charge them overnight. So what you have to kind of do with an EV is change your thought process. So I see a lot of comments saying, I would never consider an electric car until I can charge it in 4 to 5 minutes and drive 400 miles. But that is an entirely incorrect way of looking at the use case for an electric car, because driving an electric car is like having a gas station at your house overnight. So in the real world, what happens is you plug it in, you wake up in the morning, and you have a full tank essentially. And then you can drive, in the Ioniq case here, 250 miles in a day before you just plug it in at home overnight and get a full tank the next morning. So you don't have to go to a centralized filling location regularly to charge up your EV.
Yeah, I love what you said, and that's exactly right. You become much more independent because your home becomes your gas station. And not only are you more independent, you also pay a lot less, because electricity is metered depending on use, right? So at night, it becomes much cheaper. At our house, I think it's about 17 cents a kilowatt hour. So how big of a battery does that have?
Well, let's say it has like I think it's around a 70 kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
So 70 times 17 cents. It's a little bit not accurate because of losses through efficiencies, but it would be about $11 to travel 250 some miles in this car.
Yeah, and people forget about that. Now, in the case of the Lightning, not only can the truck, be filled up at home, it can do the exact opposite too. You can actually plug your house into a Ford Lightning if you have the inverter, which aren't cheap. They're $3,000 to $4,000 to install. But it has a 131 kilowatt hour battery, and the average home uses about 29 kilowatt hours a day. So you could power your house, if you live in an average home, with the Lightning for up to 4 days. Now, for all you folks who value independence, who are worried about things like the crazy storms you had in Texas, where it knocked out power, killed the grid, you actually have a backup for your house, which I think is pretty darn cool, and that's something that is somewhat unique to electric vehicles.
Other things is that they are typically quite cheap to service because there's not a lot to break in terms of Reliability problems, sure, like chargers can fail and inverters can have issues, but it's very, very rare. But there's no oil to change, there's no fluids really to worry about. So long-term wise, it should be a very affordable proposition. But the big deal is just how easy it is to keep these cars running if you have a place to charge. Now, if you live in a city and you don't have a place to charge them regularly overnight, this would be a concern for me. I don't think I would own an electric car then, because then you're relying on the public infrastructure, which currently is just not very good. It's expanding quickly, but it's not very good. So that would be one reservation I'd have.
So let me address that reservation. Did you know that when the Model T came out, there were no gas stations?
Sure.
And yet the car became incredibly successful, if not world-changing, and yet there were no gas stations, there was no infrastructure, and yet somehow the infrastructure was built around the fact. And I think the same thing is happening and will happen with electric vehicles. And I want to highlight the other point you made. You know, we have put 12,000 miles on the F-150 Lightning, and we have had zero problems with it. We have never had to change a spark plug. We have never had to worry about our catalytic converter being stolen. We have never had to change the oil. We have never had to go to an auto dealership for servicing, and that's after 12,000 miles of driving it. And in fact, beyond that, I think the truck is also much more quiet than most vehicles because there is no motor where you get all that harsh vibration and all that kind of stress that you get from an electric, that you don't get from an electric motor, but that you get from an engine. So there's, you know, it's kind of a left brain versus right brain, right? The right brain part of me loves the big old V8 and the burble of it, but the left brain part of me loves kind of the very chill and the very satisfying and quiet way that electric vehicles go down the road.
So a couple other things worth noting. A couple of misconceptions. Battery degradation. Everyone thought it was a really big deal because of the Nissan Leaf, which it was a really big deal. But there's plenty of Teslas out there with several 100,000 miles with very little battery degradation. So it seems like it's much less of an issue than people initially thought when EVs started hitting the market. It really is not much of a concern to me, at least.
Let me put some numbers to that. There have been studies done, and Tesla has been around now, I think, for 12 years. And not just 100,000 miles, we're talking cars with up to 1 million miles on them. And in general, the worst, by far the worst battery degradation that Teslas have seen is about 20%, but on average it's about 10%. So even 10, 12-year-old Teslas still have 90% of their battery capacity left. Now the Leaf was a special case, and that was because Nissan decided not to climate control their batteries. In essence, when they got hot, there was no way to cool them off, or when they got cold, there was no way to heat them up, and that is very bad for batteries because batteries, like you and me, like being at room temperature.
But of course, pretty much every new EV in the market is going to have climate-controlled batteries. A couple other things I want to address too is common misconception about where your electricity comes from. There's been study after study after study after study done, and even if your car is powered 100% by electricity created from a coal-burning power plant, you're still better off helping the environment from burning the coal at the plant versus in the car. It's just like an argument that comes up all the time, but we see it relentlessly in comments, and it's not true. Even if your car is fed off of a coal power plant, you're still helping the environment based on the physics of it. Another thing we talk about is lithium mining, which is pretty bad for the environment, and it's definitely a big concern, but other studies have found that over the course of 3 or 4 years, you'll typically offset the effects on the environment from driving an EV and all the savings to the environment from not creating tailpipe emissions. Now, there are some concerns I have about this.
Can I address those, put some numbers to it?
Sure.
So, you know, the one comment we always get is something that is either wrong or misinformed or intentionally wrong. And so I like to say, you know, you can have your own opinion, but you can't have your own facts. So here's a fact, Tommy. About 25% of America's lower 48 state power comes from renewables. So 75% comes from non-renewables. If you're up in Alaska, that's only 5% from renewables, 95% from non-renewables. So the misconception would be, like you said, that, you know, all you're doing is moving the issue upstream. But as you said correctly, the physics of it are such that when you burn a gallon of gasoline in an internal combustion engine, most of the energy, the caloric value of that energy, goes up in heat. And then you have to use giant radiator and all kinds of methods to dissipate that heat. Whereas when you burn that same gallon of, let's say, it doesn't have to be gas, it can be diesel, it can be whatever caloric value that you want to assign to coal, most of that energy, potential energy, goes into actually creating energy. And that's why it's much more efficient to actually create the power at the power plant than it is to do it in your vehicle.
So I do have some reservations about this. First thing worth noting is that California is not coming for our existing gas cars, so as far as I can tell, they're not like going to be banging on your door, taking away your trucks. Now, my big reservations about this are power outages. Big concern of mine, especially in California. They have a lot of fires, they have a lot of power outages. How are you going to keep your car charged in power outage? That is one big concern I have of mine. Especially if you don't have solar energy.
So could I address that?
Sure.
We just drove the Lightning up to Dead Horse,
Yeah.
Alaska, which is as far north as you can drive in America, and we spent a lot of time charging, and people will point to this as a reason not to get an electric car because, of course, it takes a lot longer to charge it. So on a road trip, they are not as good as gasoline cars. However, we got to a little town called Coldfoot that you've been at, right? And guess what? They had run out of gas at Coldfoot, and there was a line of about 25 vehicles and 25 motorcycles. One guy had been there overnight waiting for gasoline. So, to say that there are power outages, I would say there are also gas outages. I mean, it cuts both ways. It's not only for electricity; it can also be for gasoline, diesel,
Right.
natural gas, whatever.
But I could keep a jerry can in my garage.
Yes, you could. You
Right.
can also keep, a battery.
Not really, not
A
currently.
Tesla Powerwall battery.
Yeah, but that's a lot more expensive. That's $10,000 versus
But,
$40.
but gas does go bad and electricity doesn't.
Yeah, but it is a big concern of mine.
Fair
and
enough.
and I think, obviously gas stations need electricity to function, but a lot of gas stations have backup generators to keep going. Not a lot of houses have backup generators.
I'm just saying you can run out of both.
Yeah, but that is a big concern of mine. And then the other big concern of mine is going to be cost and availability. So currently, EVs are just quite expensive vehicles. There's a couple affordable models on the market, like the ID4 and the Chevy Bolt and Bolt EV. But apart from that, they're just expensive vehicles. And I do worry that in 2035, you're going to be cutting a lot of folks out of the market who are lower income, who cannot just afford getting an EV unless we see a big flux of more affordable electric cars onto the market.
I think that's a great point, but once again, let's look at history. For a long time, cars in general were only toys for the rich. And then the Model T once again came along and did this incredible paradigm shift where before the Model T, as far as you could travel was as far as your horse would take you, and that was it, right? But with the Model T, you could all of a sudden travel across the entire country or even across the entire world, and you could do it at an affordable price. And you're right, there are right now a lot of vehicles that are, not toys. Certainly some are toys for the rich, but they are certainly aimed at people with a lot more money. Of course, Teslas, Lucid is certainly among them. Porsche is up there with the Taycan, right? But GM has lowered the price of the Bolt recently by $7,000. And in Chattanooga, they're actually starting to build a more affordable ID4 for Volkswagen. So I think the people's electric car is coming. It's not here yet. Like I said, I think we had a bad start with the Leaf, which was supposed to be that car. It didn't work out for the most part, but now I think we're going to see some. So it is a concern, but I think it's certainly coming. So let's wrap this up.
Well, hang on. One other concern I have,
Yes.
big concern of mine. Now, they did mention there are going to be some exemptions for plug-in hybrids, but for people that are looking to buy trucks, and especially folks that are looking to buy trucks to tow regularly, there's just not a solution right now. EV towing sucks. It's just not up to where it needs to be, especially long distance. If I had like a ranch and I had horses and I needed a 350 truck, like a 350 or 3500, an electric version of that wouldn't be able to suit my needs, especially if I'm towing across state to stock shows and stuff, or whatever it be, if you have a business that relies on an internal combustion engine towing truck. So maybe we'll see some plug-in hybrids in the future, but right now EV towing's not there.
So can I address that issue too?
Yeah.
You said EV towing sucks. I would say long distance EV towing
But anything
is not
over
there.
100 miles isn't there, and that's not long distance to me.
Is not there. We just did a video where we spent the entire day towing and comparing the Lightning to a Ram 2500 with the Cummins. And around town, EV towing is just fine. Most people aren't going to tow more than, let's say, 150 miles around town, and you can do that well. So if you're a landscaper, or if you're moving, or if you're some kind of a local contractor, then you can tow all day with a Lightning or with any of the other electric trucks, and you'll be fine.
Depends.
As long as you can charge it up at home overnight. But yes, long distance EV towing is not there by any stretch of the imagination, unless you love stopping for 45 minutes every hour or two of driving, which is not convenient to say the least.
And then the final thing, which is terrifying, we talked about the infrastructure, but it seems like it's getting worse.
This is true.
Especially Electrify America had a big insurgence of new chargers being installed. Now there's a ton of them, but reliability of EV chargers has been horrible in the last year or so. It's just been unacceptably bad.
So yeah, there. We just did a video. We just published a video today, and go to alltfl.com and check it out. Where Andre drove to Albuquerque, basically 1,000 miles, and the issue with the Electrify America charging was pretty horrendous. I've been doing a lot of soul searching, wondering why Electrify America is having these issues, and they'll point to the fact that there are different cars, and they have to work with all the different electric vehicles, and there's this handshake that has to take place.
Yeah, but even the stations are down. That has nothing to do with the cars. The stations themselves are down.
So the one thing I can come up with, and it's once again a governmental problem, is that Electrify America was born out of the Dieselgate crisis or settlement, where Volkswagen was caught cheating on their fuel economy numbers, especially on their diesel vehicles, not just fuel economy numbers, but also emissions. And so they were forced to spend billions of dollars creating this network. And I think when government forces somebody to do something, you're not going to get the best work. So I kind of feel like the reason Electrify America is struggling is because it's not something that they wanted to do, but it was because something that they were forced to do. But having said that, I don't think it's fair to blame the electric car on the charging infrastructure, because if you have a Tesla, and this is of course Tesla's biggest advantage, they have a bulletproof supercharging network. And so to say, well, electric vehicles are not ready for prime time because the electric stations aren't reliable is being unfair to the electric vehicle.
Yeah, but you could also say electric vehicles are prime time because one brand has it down. Is also a little bit unfair to the charging networks.
I think Tesla keeps increasing their sales simply because of that, because these horror stories of EV charging on Electrify America are slowly percolating through the culture, and people are realizing that if they want a reliable infrastructure for charging, Tesla is the only way to go right now. And I would say if I were an automotive manufacturer, let's call them legacy manufacturer, I would give some serious thought to not working with all these new startups, but actually create and build your own. Do what Tesla did, especially with hydrogen. I would love to see a hydrogen infrastructure built out by a manufacturer in America, because I think that also provides an interesting electric path to creating an interesting new way of powering things that wouldn't have the issues that the current electric cars have.
Well, let us know what you think in the comments below. And as always, it's been Tommy.
And Roman, saying, don't panic, they're not that bad. Electric cars are actually, there's a lot of advantages. Boy, you were really down on them today.
Well, I think it's just important to look at both sides.
I agree.
I drive electric, I love it, but I think there's a lot of concerns for me. We talked about power outages, the charging infrastructure, and then towing, right? If I didn't have a place to charge my EV up overnight, even 110 volts, which is enough for a lot of people, I would never buy one. I cannot rely on the infrastructure.
But people, if that attitude had been around when the Model T, because let's face it, the Lightning is the Model T of electric trucks. That is the Model T.
No, I don't think the Lightning is the Model T of electric trucks.
It is.
Because it starts at $47,000, and that's just too much money. It's just too much money.
But I'm saying I'm not talking about the cost and value proposition. I'm talking about the fact that it's like the first version of their electric truck.
Oh,
that's what I'm talking
but
about.
I'm saying I wouldn't have bought the first car. I would have waited until
you would have had the horse.
I would have had the horse.
Gallop until it couldn't
I would
gallop
have had the
anymore.
horse until the Model A came out, and then there would have been gas stations and stuff around. So I'd probably wait a little bit. But of course, California is not allowing that option. Anyway, let us know what you guys think in the comments below.
Wait. Once again, I think you're creating more panic than we hoped. They are allowing that option. No one's taking anybody's current gas car away. But you can still go out and buy.
Yes, that's a good point. You can still buy used
Hellcat.
cars. Well, yeah.
You can go out and buy a Hellcat. You can go out and buy a Corvette.
For the next couple of years.
Right. So it didn't take long for that gas station network to develop and to be built around. So 10 years from now seems like it's around the corner, but it's a long ways away. I'm just saying there's a lot of good about electric cars and trucks that gets lost in this conversation because people are so dead set against them because the government is forcing them onto people. And that's why I said at the beginning of this, I don't believe the government should be forcing cars. I don't think they should be subsidizing them just like they shouldn't be doing other kinds of subsidies. Let the free market decide.
So you're against the California idea?
Look, I'm against all government mandates of that sort.
Yeah.
on both sides of the political spectrum. And there's another side of this that's also, forcing things to happen. So I don't think the government should be intruding in my life and my choice.
All right, well, listen what you think. I'll see you in the next video.
Ciao.